6:43 a.m., Savannah, Georgia. The knock didn't wait for permission. Get up. You don't stay here anymore. The words landed before my feet touched the floor flat, sharp, rehearsed. The morning light was still thin, barely awake, slipping through the curtains like it didn't want to see what was happening. I sat on the edge of my bed, the quilt pulled around my knees, trying to understand how a room I'd slept in for 15 years had suddenly become temporary. Hands I didn't recognize moved through my space. Drawers opened. A suitcase appeared. The air smelled of floor cleaner and cold coffee. Someone avoided my eyes. Someone else said my name too loudly, as if volume could replace kindness. "Mom, don't make this difficult," Jason said from the doorway. He didn't step inside. He didn't have to. Difficult, I thought. Is that what this is called now? They lifted my arm, not roughly but without asking. That was worse. The carpet felt unfamiliar under my bare feet, as if it had already decided I no longer belonged. I reached back instinctively, my fingers brushing the doorframe. The small notch where I'd once measured my granddaughter's height. The key was already gone from the hook. "I just need a minute," I said. "No, we're on a schedule." The hallway stretched longer than it ever had. Each step echoed too clearly, like the house was listening. Shame tried to rise hot, fast, but I held it down. Stay calm, I told myself. Pay attention. As they guided me away, I caught my reflection in the mirror by the stairs. Older, yes, smaller maybe, but present, watching, remembering. Because even then, with my room behind me and my key missing, one thought arrived fully formed and unafraid. This isn't over. 7:12 a.m., Savannah, Georgia. The car smelled like vinyl and impatience. I sat in the back seat, my hands folded over the small purse they'd allowed me to bring. The window beside me showed streets I knew by heart. Oak trees, quiet porches, the bakery on the corner just opening its doors. Everything looked the same. That was the unsettling part. My life had shifted, but the world hadn't bothered to notice. No one spoke as we drove. Jason stared ahead, jaw tight, as if silence itself were a favor. I watched condensation trace slow lines down the glass and focused on my breathing. Don't cry now, I told myself, not here. Fear came in waves, soft at first, then heavier. Not fear of being hurt, but of being erased. Decisions had been made quickly, confidently, without my voice. That realization settled deeper than the humiliation of being led out of my own room. We stopped in front of a building I didn't recognize. Beige, clean, temporary. Someone opened the door and gestured for me to get out, the way you would with luggage. "This is just until things are sorted," Jason said. "It's better this way." Better for whom, I wondered. My feet touched the pavement, steady despite everything. I straightened my coat and looked up at the sky, blue, indifferent, unchanged. Inside, the air was too cool. Papers waited on a desk, forms, clipboards. A pen placed carefully in front of me. "Just sign here," a woman said gently. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I felt something else arrive. Quiet, familiar. The instinct I'd relied on for decades when something didn't feel right. I wasn't confused. I wasn't lost. I was being moved. And somewhere beneath the fear, another feeling took shape. Slow, deliberate, unmistakable. Resolve. 7:34 a.m., Savannah, Georgia. Memory doesn't ask permission. It arrives when it's needed. I have lived long enough to know how quickly people forget what it took to build a life. 30 years earlier, after my husband passed, the house went quiet, not peaceful, practical. Bills still came, repairs still waited. I learned to read contracts at the kitchen table with a cup of cooling coffee. Learned to ask questions without apologizing for them. Learned to sign my name only after every line made sense. Survival teaches you patience. Independence teaches you accuracy. Jason was young then, confident, restless, certain the world would move faster if he pushed it. I taught him steadiness instead. That land lasts longer than impulse. That money moves best when it moves quietly. He listened when it suited him. When it didn't, he smiled and waited for me to finish, already sure he knew better. I mistook that certainty for ambition. I didn't call it what it was. I kept records because records keep people honest. Deeds, statements, notes in the margins explaining why a decision had been made and when. Not because I distrusted my family, but because I respected the work it takes to build something worth protecting. That habit never left me. As years passed, help was offered more often. "Let me handle that," Jason would say. "You've done enough." I accepted sometimes, not from weakness, but from weariness. Peace has a way of softening your guard if you're not careful. Sitting in that cold room now, I understood the mistake. My silence had been read as surrender. My calm had been mistaken for absence. I closed my eyes briefly and felt the weight of those years settle, not as regret, but as preparation. Because I hadn't spent decades building a life just to lose it quietly. And I knew exactly where the proof was. 8:02 a.m., Savannah, Georgia. Red flags rarely announce themselves. Jason didn't change all at once. That's what made it easy to miss. He didn't raise his voice or issue commands in the beginning. He became helpful. Too helpful. He started answering the phone before I could reach it, his voice confident and familiar. "She doesn't need to worry about that," he'd say easily. Or, "I'll take care of it for her." The words sounded generous, protective, and because I valued peace, I let them pass. I noticed it in smaller moments first. Papers moved from where I'd placed them. Appointments rescheduled without my handwriting on the calendar. When I asked, Jason smiled, warm, reassuring. "Just simplifying things," he said. "You shouldn't have to deal with all this anymore." His tone suggested relief, as if he were lifting a burden I hadn't asked him to carry. What unsettled me wasn't what he did. It was how certain he was that I wouldn't object. He began speaking about me instead of to me when others were around. "Mom gets tired easily," he'd say lightly. Or, "She prefers I handle the details now." None of it was entirely false, but none of it was his to offer. Each sentence shifted me slightly out of the center of my own life, as if I were being repositioned without my consent. I told myself not to be suspicious. Don't turn help into hostility, I thought. I had earned quiet. I didn't want conflict to disturb it. But calm can be misleading when it assumes agreement. Standing in that unfamiliar hallway earlier, strangers gripping my arms as if they had authority over me, I finally understood what those early moments had been building toward. Help had become access. Access had become assumption. And assumption, once left unchallenged, becomes control. I straightened my shoulders, feeling something settle firmly inside me. This hadn't started that morning. It had been planned. 9:14 a.m., Savannah, Georgia. The first betrayal revealed itself quietly. I discovered it the way most truths like this surface, by accident. A thin envelope lay on the dining table, tucked beneath a stack of mail Jason had already sorted. The paper was heavier than the rest, formal. I recognized the letterhead immediately, though I hadn't seen it addressed to me in years. A legal office, one I had trusted once. Inside, the language was calm, almost gentle. Words like authorization, temporary authority, administrative convenience. I read slowly, carefully, until my eyes reached the section that made my breath pause. My name was there, typed, clean, official. That is not my signature, I thought, not with alarm but certainty. I had signed my name the same way for decades, the slant unmistakable, the loop at the end familiar even to me. This version was rigid, correct in form, wrong in truth. Jason appeared in the doorway then. He stopped when he saw the paper in my hands. Just for a moment, long enough to matter. "Oh," he said lightly, "you found that." Found, as if it had wandered in on its own. "What is this?" I asked. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. "It's nothing permanent," he replied, already stepping closer. "Just something to make things easier in case of emergencies." "You filed paperwork in my name," I said. He didn't deny it. He smiled, patient. "I didn't think you'd mind. It's for your own good." There it was. The sentence people use when they've already crossed a line and want you to believe you invited them. I folded the document carefully and placed it back on the table. "We'll talk about this later," I said. Relief crossed his face. He believed the matter settled. But inside me, something aligned with quiet precision. This wasn't confusion. It was the first betrayal. 11:02 a.m., Savannah, Georgia. The second betrayal took shape through routine. It arrived disguised as care. Jason began showing up with schedules already decided. Appointments I hadn't requested, forms I hadn't seen, conversations I hadn't been part of. He spoke gently, always gently, as if volume alone determined respect. "I moved your doctor visit to Thursday," he said one morning, setting his phone on the counter. "It works better for everyone." Everyone, I noted, did not include me. I asked questions carefully, the way I always had. Where did the request come from? Who authorized the change? His answers slid past specifics, smooth, practiced. They suggested it. It's standard. You don't need to worry about that anymore. Anymore. Mail stopped arriving directly to my room. It appeared opened, stacked neatly in the living room. Financial statements were summarized aloud instead of handed over. When I asked to see originals, Jason's smile tightened just slightly. "Mom, you trust me, right?" Trust had become his shield, a word he lifted whenever clarity threatened him. That afternoon, I asked the receptionist at the clinic a simple question: who had confirmed my appointment? She answered without hesitation. "Your son," she said. "He's listed as your primary decision maker." The phrase echoed in my chest long after I left. Primary decision maker. I walked home slowly, noticing details I'd ignored before. The way my door no longer locked properly, the missing file folder from my desk, the faint smell of cleaning solution in my room, as if someone had been preparing it for someone else. Jason watched me closely that evening. Too closely. "You seem tired," he said. "Maybe you should rest." Rest in his voice sounded less like kindness and more like instruction. That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle. Every creak felt intentional now. Every silence held weight. The first betrayal had been paperwork. This one was erasure. And I understood then. He wasn't waiting for permission. He was practicing replacement. 6:48 a.m., Savannah, Georgia. The breaking point arrived without warning. I woke to voices in the hallway, low, unfamiliar, paired with Jason's calm tone. The door to my room opened before I could sit up. Two men stood behind him, polite faces, firm posture. One held a clipboard, the other avoided my eyes. "Mom," Jason said evenly, "we need to move you for a bit." Move me, I thought, from my own room. I asked where. No one answered directly. Words like temporary and for your safety floated past me. Weightless, useless. When I tried to stand on my own, a hand touched my elbow. Guiding, not forceful, but uninvited. The humiliation settled quietly, the way shame often does. "This isn't necessary," I said. My voice surprised me with its calm. Jason sighed, the sound rehearsed. "You're confused," he replied. "This will make things easier." Easier for whom? They walked me down the hall as if escorting a decision already made. The house smelled different, cleaner, emptier. My door frame brushed my shoulder as I passed, a small, grounding pain. I noticed my room had been stripped of photographs, drawers half open, the bed already turned down like a guest space. Not mine. I stopped. I didn't agree to this. Jason didn't look back. "You don't need to," he said. That sentence did it. Something steady and cold settled inside me. Not panic, not anger. Clarity. I understood then that silence would no longer protect me. It was being used against me. When we reached the front door, I asked one final question. On whose authority? No one answered. The door opened. Morning air rushed in. And in that moment, standing barefoot on my own threshold, I made a quiet promise to myself. If he wanted authority, he would have to prove it. And I would no longer make it easy. 7:26 a.m., Savannah, Georgia. Aftermath settles. Determination takes shape. They placed me in the back seat of a car that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old upholstery. No one spoke. The city passed by the window in fragments, porches, oak trees, early morning traffic, familiar things moving without me. I sat upright, hands folded, breathing evenly. Observe, I told myself. Remember. The building they brought me to was quiet in the way places are when they expect compliance. A small room, neutral walls, a bed tucked too tightly. Someone handed me a paper cup of water and explained routines I hadn't asked for. Temporary, for evaluation, for safety. Words designed to dull edges. When I was finally alone, the silence felt different, thicker but useful. I checked myself for panic and found none. What I felt instead was resolve, clean, unmistakable. I took inventory. My purse was gone, my phone too. But my mind was intact, my memory clear. and tucked into the lining of my coat, missed in their haste, was the small card I'd kept for years. My lawyer's number, worn at the corners, trusted. I waited until afternoon, until footsteps passed less often, until the building settled into routine. Then I asked to make a call. I did not explain why. I did not ask permission twice. When the line connected, I spoke slowly, precisely. Dates, names, actions. No emotion, just facts. There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Helen," he said, "you did the right thing, calling." I closed my eyes, not in relief, but in confirmation. So it begins, I thought. Outside the window, the light shifted. Somewhere beyond these walls, authority was being questioned. Quietly, properly. And for the first time since they opened my bedroom door, I knew exactly what came next. 3:42 p.m., Savannah, Georgia. Preparation begins quietly. The call did not change my surroundings, but it changed the direction of things. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the building breathe. Air vents cycling, distant footsteps, a cart rolling down the hallway. This place ran on routine. That was its weakness. Routine assumes no resistance. I asked for a notebook. They brought me one with thin pages and a pen that scratched. I thanked them. Politeness still has its uses. When the door closed, I began to write. Not feelings, not accusations. Times, names, what was said, who was present, what was taken. Precision steadied my hand. I remembered the envelope in my dresser drawer at home. The one Jason never asked about. Inside it were copies. Powers I never signed, letters that arrived already answered, bank notices redirected without my consent. I had kept them out of habit, not suspicion. Habit, it turns out, is preparation in disguise. That evening, a nurse asked how I was settling in. "Fine," I said. "I'll need access to my personal documents." She nodded, not agreeing, not refusing. Systems respond to certainty, not explanation. My lawyer called back before dinner. His voice was calm, professional. "I'm initiating an emergency review," he said. "There are protocols for this. You won't be here long." I thanked him. I did not ask how long not long meant. Timelines reveal themselves when pressure is applied. When night came, I lay awake only briefly. Fear never arrived. What filled the space instead was order. Steps, sequence. Let them believe this is containment, I thought. I know it's a pause. Somewhere outside this room, documents were being requested. Phones were ringing. Assumptions were loosening their grip. Preparation doesn't announce itself. It aligns pieces quietly until the next move becomes inevitable. 9:11 a.m., Savannah, Georgia. The turning point arrives. Morning brought a different energy to the building. The hallway sounded sharper. Heels instead of soft shoes. Voices lowered instead of casual. I noticed it before anyone said a word. Institutions change their posture when questions become formal. A staff member knocked and asked me to wait in the common room. No explanation, just procedure. The television was on without sound. A news anchor moving her mouth in practiced concern. I chose a chair near the window and sat with my hands folded, the way I always had when patience was required. My phone vibrated. One message. Do not answer questions yet. I'm calling them now. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down. This is the moment, I thought. Not the shouting kind, not the dramatic kind, the administrative kind, the kind that reroutes authority. Across the room, two aides stood together whispering. One glanced at me, then away. A clipboard appeared where there hadn't been one before. Names were written, crossed out, written again. The director arrived 10 minutes later. She smiled, the careful smile of someone stepping onto unfamiliar ground. Mrs. Brooks, she said, there seems to be some confusion about your placement. Confusion, I thought, is what people call resistance when it doesn't behave politely. I was brought here without consent, I replied. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. My attorney is reviewing the paperwork. Her smile tightened. She nodded once and excused herself. When she returned, her tone had changed. Less instructional, more cautious. We'll need to pause all decisions, she said, until clarification is received. Pause. The word landed cleanly. I looked down at my hands, steady, unmarked. This isn't reversal yet, I thought, but it's the hinge. Somewhere beyond these walls, my lawyer was speaking names into the right ears, and every assumption that brought me here was being asked to prove itself. 11:27 a.m., Savannah, Georgia. The reveal is procedural. I was asked to wait again, this time in a smaller office with a round table and two chairs that faced each other too directly. A legal pad sat in the center, untouched. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. I recognized the setting immediately. This was not about comfort. This was about record. My attorney called precisely on time. I put him on speaker as requested. His voice filled the room with calm authority. Each word measured, unhurried. Mrs. Brooks' placement was initiated without a valid guardianship order, he said. There is no court filing authorizing removal, confinement, or transfer of decision-making rights. Silence followed. Not awkward, intentional. The administrator cleared her throat. We were informed the family had legal authority. Assumed authority, my attorney corrected gently. Not granted. There is a difference. He referenced documents by date and number, a power of attorney that had expired, a medical note that lacked physician signature, intake forms completed by someone other than me. Each item placed carefully into sequence, like stones building a path no one could deny. I watched the administrator's pen slow, then stop. So, to be clear, she said carefully, Mrs. Brooks is here against her will. Yes, my attorney replied, and that constitutes unlawful restraint. Restraint. The word settled heavily into the room. I spoke then, not loudly, not emotionally. I asked to remain in my home, I said. That request was ignored. The administrator nodded once, decisively. Then we have to correct this. Correct, I thought. Not apologize, not explain. Correct. My attorney, concluded with final instructions: immediate release, documented acknowledgement, and notification to all involved parties. When the call ended, no one rushed to speak. The truth had arrived fully formed, and there was nowhere left for it to be softened. 3:41 p.m., Savannah, Georgia. Consequences do not hurry, they settle. The paperwork moved faster than I expected. By mid-afternoon, Jason's access badge was deactivated. The administrator explained it calmly, as if discussing a scheduling change. Until the review concludes, she said evenly, Mr. Brooks will have no authority to make decisions on your behalf. Jason stood near the window, arms crossed. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He stared out at the parking lot as if answers might arrive there, late. What followed wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. Notices sent, accounts flagged, a formal inquiry opened, questioning how my removal had been processed without verification. Staff members who had avoided my eyes that morning now spoke to me directly, carefully, by name. Mrs. Brooks, one of them said, we're sorry for the distress. Distress wasn't the word I would have chosen, but I nodded. By evening, the social shift had begun. Jason's calls went unanswered, not by me, but by the system he had relied on. When authority is withdrawn, people recalibrate quickly. Conversations shorten, assumptions stop traveling freely. At dinner, I sat with other residents who had heard pieces of the story. No one asked questions. Respect doesn't always require explanation. Jason didn't join us. Later, as I packed my things, I noticed how light my suitcase felt. Not because I owned little, but because control weighs more than belongings. Before leaving, the administrator handed me a copy of the incident report. For your records, she said. I slid it into my bag beside my lawyer's card. Evidence doesn't need emotion to be effective. As I walked out, I didn't look back. Not because I was afraid of what I'd see, but because the chapter behind me no longer required my attention. Some downfalls arrive with shouting. Others arrive when the room simply stops accommodating you. 7:18 p.m., Savannah, Georgia. Healing does not announce itself. It arrives quietly. That evening, I sat by the window of the guest room my lawyer had arranged for me. Outside, the light softened as the sun lowered, turning the trees a muted gold. No one rushed me. No one checked my schedule. The silence felt different now, not imposed, not empty, chosen. I removed my shoes and rested my feet on the floor, feeling the steady coolness beneath them. Small sensations grounded me, the fabric of the chair, the distant hum of traffic, the slow rhythm of my own breathing. My body had been tense longer than I realized. It began to release its grip. For months, perhaps years, I had been told what was best for me, where I should be, what I could manage, when I should rest. Those words had stacked quietly, like furniture placed in a room until there was barely space to move. Now, the room felt open again. I thought about Jason, not with anger, but with clarity. Control, I had learned, often disguises itself as concern. And silence can be mistaken for agreement when people benefit from not hearing you speak. I made tea and carried it carefully to the chair by the window. The cup was warm in my hands, familiar, ordinary. I hadn't lost my life. I had simply reclaimed it. Later, I wrote one final note in my notebook. Not evidence, not dates, just a sentence for myself. I am allowed to decide. The night settled gently around me. Tomorrow would bring logistics, forms, signatures, arrangements. But tonight belonged to something else. Healing doesn't rush to prove itself. It waits until you finally have room to feel it. 6:41 a.m., Savannah, Georgia. Morning returns what was never lost. I woke before the alarm, the kind of waking that comes without urgency. Pale morning light filtered through the curtains and rested gently on the walls. For the first time in a long while, I didn't need to orient myself by fear or expectation. I simply knew where I was, and more importantly, who I was. I stood by the window and watched the street come alive. One car passing, a dog walker pausing at the corner, a shop opening its doors. Life continuing at its own pace. I breathed in slowly. The air felt clean, honest. For years, I had believed strength needed to be loud to be real. That justice required confrontation, that dignity was something you defended with force. I understand now how wrong that was. The strongest moments of my life arrived quietly, when I chose not to explain myself, not to argue, not to disappear. What they mistook for weakness was patience. What they mistook for absence was restraint. And what they tried to take from me, my authority, my voice, my place in my own life, was never truly theirs to claim. I folded the notebook closed and placed it back into my bag. It had served its purpose, not as a weapon, but as a witness. Some truths don't need repeating once they've been heard. As I stepped into the morning, I carried no bitterness with me, only clarity. Control dissolves when it's exposed to light. And dignity, once reclaimed, doesn't need permission to remain. If there is one thing I know now, it is this. Age does not erase ownership. Calm does not mean surrender. And silence, when chosen, can be the most powerful voice of all. I walked forward without looking back. That was my justice. And that was enough.